Have you ever felt like you were being watched? Like something or someone was just waiting for you to notice them? This story started with a van, a new neighbor, and a feeling I couldn't shake. But what we discovered next still haunts me to this day. Stick around, but trust me, you'll want to keep the lights on. It all began a few months ago. My wife and I noticed a van parked in the driveway next door. No moving trucks, no furniture, just the van, sitting there, unnervingly still. We tried to introduce ourselves, but no one answered the door. Odd, considering their van was parked outside. That night, we heard the garage door creak open. Peeking through the blinds, we saw the man, plain white t-shirt, jeans, moving boxes into the garage. The motion light flickered, casting an eerie glow on his face. He seemed normal, but the way he moved, slow, deliberate, made my skin crawl. A few days later, the van disappeared. But late one night, the garage door opened again. This time, the sounds were different. Along with the thuds of boxes, there was a metallic scraping, like nails dragging across metal. It echoed through the night, sharp and unnatural. I went to the window and saw him. He was staring right at me, his eyes unblinking, his face expressionless. Our eyes locked, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. I quickly looked away, but the image of his cold, empty stare stayed with me. The next day, I decided to confront him. But as I approached his house, he sped off in his van, tires screeching. My heart raced. What was he hiding? That night, my wife woke me up, whispering, "I heard the backyard gate open." I brushed it off, but she insisted. Reluctantly, I went to check. The neighbor's van was back, and as I stepped into the yard, I heard footsteps, soft, deliberate, moving toward the side of the house. Then a loud slam, the gate. Someone had been in our yard. The next day, I spoke to our neighbor, Gene. He'd been hearing the same scraping sounds at night. "It's not just you," he said, his voice trembling. "Last night, I heard crying, like someone was in pain." That Saturday, as I opened the blinds, I saw him again, standing at his window, staring directly at me. He didn't move, didn't blink, just watched. I waved, but he didn't respond. When I brought my wife to the window, he was gone. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed a flashlight and went to the neighbor's garage. The door was unlocked. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of rust and decay. Boxes were stacked haphazardly, and in the corner, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A pile of old, rusted tools covered in dried blood. And then, I noticed the floor. Scratches. Deep, jagged scratches, like someone or something had been dragged across the concrete. At the back of the garage, I found a door. It was slightly ajar, and from within, I heard it. The crying. Soft, muffled, but unmistakable. I pushed the door open, and the flashlight revealed a small, dark room. Inside, there were photos. Hundreds of them, taped to the walls. Photos of me, my wife, Jean, all taken without us knowing. And in the center of the room, a single chair with ropes tied to the arms and legs. I ran back to the house, my heart pounding. The next morning, I called the police. But when they arrived, the garage was empty. No tools, no photos, no chair. Just an empty, dusty room. The van never returned, and we never saw the neighbor again. But sometimes, late at night, I hear the scraping. And when I look out the window, I swear I see him, standing in the shadows, watching. Sometimes, the scariest things aren't the ones that happen to you, but the ones that could have. Be careful who you trust. And if you ever see a van parked in your neighbor's driveway, don't knock on the door. 2 months ago, I bought a secluded holiday mobile home nestled on 2 acres of dense, shadowy woods. It's a modest shack. 2 tiny bedrooms, a cramped living area, 1 bathroom, and a small kitchen. The property is quiet, peaceful, and just a 10-minute drive from my favorite snowboarding mountain. It was supposed to be my escape from the chaos of the city, but now it's become my worst nightmare. The first weekend there, I brought my family to help me decorate. We visited a local furniture store and picked out a few couches and essentials. My dad's pickup truck made moving everything easy, but the noise must have drawn attention. That's when he showed up. His name was Earl, a grizzled man with a thick Hudson Valley accent and a demeanor that felt off. He introduced himself as the neighbor, and at first, he seemed friendly enough. But there was something unsettling about the way he lingered, watching us with hollow eyes as we unloaded the furniture. My dad tried to make small talk, but Earl's responses were curt, almost rehearsed. Eventually, he left, disappearing into the woods like a shadow. 2 weeks later, I returned alone to bring more belongings: my snowboarding gear, a Wi-Fi setup, and some personal items. As soon as I arrived, Earl appeared at my door, uninvited. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, his eyes scanning the room like he was memorizing every detail. "Place is looking nice," he muttered, his voice low and gravelly. Trying to be polite, I accepted his offer for a beer at his place. His mobile home was larger than mine, but it felt wrong. The air was heavy, the walls adorned with strange, faded photographs of the woods. As we sat on his creaky deck, Earl's questions grew more intrusive. "Why'd you come here?" he asked, his tone sharp. "City folk like you don't belong in these parts." I tried to laugh it off, but his mood darkened. He began ranting about how outsiders were ruining the area, his voice rising with every word. His hands clenched around his beer bottle, his knuckles white. "You people think you can just waltz in and take whatever you want," he spat. "But this land, it don't belong to you." I stood up, forcing a smile. "Thanks for the beer, Earl. I should get going." He didn't respond, just stared at me with those empty eyes as I left. But as I walked back to my place, I heard him shout, "I'm sorry." His voice echoed through the trees, sending a chill down my spine. That night, I lay on my mattress, trying to shake off the unease. But then I heard it, a voice outside, muttering curses. I peered out the window, but the woods were pitch black. The voice grew louder, angrier, until it felt like it was right outside my door. I locked every window and door, my heart pounding. The next day, Earl returned. He pounded on my door, yelling my name. "I know you're in there," he shouted. "Your car's here." I stayed hidden, too terrified to move. He knocked for what felt like an eternity before finally leaving. But I could feel his presence lingering, like he was watching me from the shadows. That evening, as I tried to distract myself with a movie, I heard the voice again. This time, it was closer. I turned off the TV and crept to the window. There, in the woods, stood Earl. His arms hung limp at his sides, his face twisted into a grotesque smile. He stared directly at me, unblinking, before vanishing into the trees. I called my dad, my voice trembling. "I think Earl's dangerous," I said. "I don't feel safe here." But before I could leave, the nightmares began. Every night I heard his voice outside, whispering threats, cursing my name. And then, one night, I saw him again. This time, standing in my living room, his eyes glowing in the dark. "You shouldn't have come here," he hissed. "This land, it's mine, and now you're mine too." I fled the next morning, taking only what I could carry. I haven't been back since, but I can still hear his voice in my dreams, calling me back to the woods. My family wants to go with me next time, but I know it won't matter. Earl isn't just a neighbor. He's something else, something ancient, something evil, and he's waiting for me. When I was 7 years old, my family and I lived in a rundown neighborhood. It wasn't the kind of place where you'd expect safety and the house next to ours. Well, let's just say our neighbor was an absolute creep. He was never friendly, always lurking in the shadows. I was too young to remember much, but my mother recalls the events vividly. It was just the four of us that night, my mother, my two siblings, and me, since my dad was away on one of his business trips. At midnight, the knocking started. My mom, already half asleep, got up and made her way to the front door. She called out, asking who was there, but received no reply. At first, she brushed it off, assuming it was just some kids playing a prank, ding-dong ditching us. She returned to her bed, trying to shake the unease gnawing at her. But about half an hour later, the knocking began again. More urgent this time, like someone was determined to make her answer. She crept to the side window, peering through the blinds to see if anyone was out there. But the street was eerily quiet, no sign of anyone, just the stillness of the night. Still, something didn't feel right. In this neighborhood, you could never take anything at face value. It was a place where you always had to assume the worst. By now, her anxiety was rising. She couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. In a panic, she grabbed my dad's shotgun and settled into the living room, sitting in the pitch-black darkness, listening for any sound. She didn't wake us up. My siblings and I were still too young, and she didn't want to scare us. Then, there it was again. A knock, sharp and insistent, coming from the front door. My mom, trembling, moved to the window again. Nothing. No one in sight. That's when the fear began to creep in. She yelled out into the night, telling whoever it was that she would call the police and shoot anyone who tried to break in. She hoped her words would drive the person away, and they did. The knocking stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. At this point, my mom woke us up, just in case something terrible was about to happen. We sat together in the living room, trembling, waiting for the police. They finally arrived around 2 a.m., but their search turned up nothing. They walked the neighborhood looking for clues, but the only thing they found was a piece of barbed wire, sharp, twisted, and discarded just near our front door. The officer who spoke to my mom told her that it was a good thing she hadn't opened the door, or who knows what might have happened. The police assured us they would patrol the area until morning and conduct a more thorough investigation once daylight broke. But the terror didn't end there. The next morning, when the police returned, they discovered something chilling. Footprints. They circled the house, making their way toward the back, where my bedroom window was. And there, in the window sill, they found deep, claw-like marks, scratches where someone had tried to pry it open. The window had been tampered with, but whoever it was hadn't gotten in. It was then that my mom's suspicions were confirmed. She often saw the neighbor from next door peering through his curtains, staring into our windows with those cold, unblinking eyes. He would always be watching, lurking in the background, his gaze following us as if he knew exactly when my dad wasn't home. He knew our routines, our comings and goings, and it was always him. Always the same man. But the worst part? He knew the exact car my father drove, so he could always tell when he was away. We didn't stay much longer in that house. We left soon after, but the memory of that night and the eyes that watched from the darkness still haunt me to this day.